The knock came at 7:30 on a November evening when the fog hung over Dover like a shroud, and the sound of waves against the cliffs felt like the heartbeat of a dying world. November 1944. Somewhere between hope and despair, between the relief that France was liberated and the terror that the war still wasn't over, Margaret Holbrook stood in her kitchen peeling potatoes for a dinner she'd eat alone. When the knock sounded, sharp and deliberate against the old oak door, her hands went still. The knife clattered into the sink. Evening visitors meant one thing: telegram, missing in action, regrets to inform, the words every wife had memorized without ever wanting to learn them. She dried her hands on her apron, each movement slow as drowning, and walked to the door. But when she opened it, the man standing on her doorstep wasn't wearing British uniform. He was tall, maybe 30, with eyes the colour of North Sea ice and a Wehrmacht jacket with the rank insignia carefully cut away. And in his hands, trembling against the cold November wind, was a letter. Her husband's handwriting on the envelope. Then he said it, in English broken by a German accent so thick it sounded like an apology. "Please, your husband. He asked me. I promise him." Before we go deeper into this impossible true story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from around the world. These stories of humanity in the middle of hell need to be remembered, and you're part of keeping them alive. Margaret Holbrook, 32 years old, a nurse's daughter from a village that clung to the white cliffs like a prayer, felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her hands moved to the doorframe, knuckles white, because standing was suddenly something that required concentration. Behind the German soldier, the street was empty. November darkness. Blackout curtains in every window. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and went silent. She'd been told 3 months ago, July 14th, Bastille Day, which felt like God's cruel joke. Captain Thomas Holbrook, Royal Engineers, killed during the liberation of Caen. Blown up clearing mines from a road so the tanks could advance. No body recovered, no grave to visit, just a letter from his commanding officer that used words like heroic and sacrifice and grateful nation, as if any of those could fill the space where her husband used to sleep. And now this, a German soldier, on her doorstep, holding a letter in Thomas's handwriting. The handwriting she'd memorized from 3 years of letters that always ended the same way. "All my love, always, T." "How?" she whispered, the word catching in her throat like broken glass. "How do you have this?" The German soldier, his face hollow with exhaustion or guilt, or something Margaret didn't have words for, shifted his weight. His boots were caked with mud that looked wrong for England, too red, too thick. French mud. "Please," he said again, holding the letter toward her like an offering, like evidence, like something precious he'd carried too far to let go of now. He was dying. He give me this. He make me promise. Find his wife. Tell her he love her. Tell her the mine, it was not supposed to be there. Tell her he was thinking of her. Margaret's vision blurred. Her hands moved without permission, reaching for the letter, and the moment her fingers touched the paper, the German soldier let go, as if it burned him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." And then he was gone, disappearing into the November fog like a ghost, like something Margaret had imagined. Except the letter was real. The letter was in her hands. The paper was cold from the wind and creased from being carried. And when she opened it with shaking fingers that could barely grip the envelope, Thomas's handwriting spilled across the page like blood, like truth, like the last words of a man who knew he was dying and needed her to know he hadn't forgotten, even at the end, even when the world was exploding around him, that she was the first thing and the last thing and the only thing that mattered. The letter was dated July the 12th, 1944, 2 days before the official date of Thomas's death. Margaret's kitchen clock ticked in the silence. The potatoes sat half-peeled in the sink. The letter shook in her hands because her whole body was shaking, and she read the words once, twice, 3 times before they became real. My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And somehow, impossibly, a man I should hate has kept his word. We were clearing mines outside Caen. Standard procedure. Except one of them wasn't where the map said it should be. I knew the moment I saw it. There wasn't time to run. There wasn't time for anything except one thought. You. I need you to know that you were the last thing I thought of. Not the war, not the mission. You. The way you looked on our wedding day. The way you laughed at my terrible jokes. The way you said my name in the morning like it was a question and a promise both. I need you to know that if I had a choice, I would have chosen 1,000 more mornings with you over any glory, any mission, any war. But we don't get to choose. So I'm writing this while I still can, and I am giving it to the only man who might actually deliver it. A German medic who tried to save me, who is trying to save me now, even though we both know it's too late. His name is Friedrich. He doesn't speak much English. I don't speak much German. But I told him your name. I told him where you live, and I made him promise. I don't know why he said yes. Maybe because dying men's requests cross borders that living men can't. Maybe because even Germans understand love. All my love. Always. Even now. Especially now. T. Margaret stood in her kitchen, holding her husband's last words, while the world outside continued like nothing had changed, like the universe hadn't just split open and revealed something impossible. A German soldier had kept his promise, had crossed enemy lines, had found her house on a street in Dover that shouldn't be findable unless you knew exactly where you were going, had delivered a letter from a dead man because dying men ask things that living men can't refuse, even if they should, even if it breaks every rule, even if it makes them traitors to their own uniform. And Thomas. Thomas had used his last minutes of consciousness not to curse the mine, or the war, or the Germans, but to write about her, about wedding days and morning laughter and a future they'd never have. Margaret's legs gave out. She slid down the kitchen wall until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, the letter pressed against her chest, and the sound that came out of her was something between a sob and a scream. Not grief. Not yet. Something more dangerous than grief. The terrible, overwhelming, crushing weight of being loved that completely by someone who was gone. The knowledge that Thomas's last act on earth had been to try to reach her, and that a stranger, an enemy, had cared enough to help him do it. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time stopped meaning anything. The clock kept ticking, but minutes were just sounds now, empty as the space beside her in bed. Eventually, she stood, washed her face, reread the letter. And that's when she noticed it. The handwriting wasn't quite right in places. The ink was 2 different colours. As if Thomas had started writing, stopped, and someone else had helped him finish, someone whose hand wasn't steady, someone who'd held the pen for a dying man and written the words Thomas couldn't physically form anymore. Friedrich. The German medic had helped Thomas write his goodbye, the same man who'd just stood on her doorstep in a Wehrmacht jacket with the insignia cut away, looking like he'd walked through hell to get here. And Margaret understood something that should have been impossible but somehow wasn't. This German soldier hadn't just delivered a letter. He'd helped write it, had crossed from enemy to human in the time it took a British captain to bleed out in French mud, had promised something that could get him shot by his own side, and had kept that promise. Before Margaret could process what that meant, what she was supposed to do with that information, the second knock came, different this time. Harder. Official. She opened the door, still holding the letter, and found 2 British military police officers standing in the fog. "Mrs. Holbrook," the first one said. He was young, maybe 25, with sergeant stripes and eyes that had seen enough to be tired. "Yes?" "We have reason to believe a German POW may have been in this area, possibly approached your residence. Have you seen anyone suspicious?" Margaret's grip tightened on the letter. Her mind raced through the implications. German POW. Friedrich had escaped to deliver a promise, could be shot for desertion, could be shot for being behind Allied lines in uniform, could be executed for any of 100 violations of military law. And she could tell these officers the truth, could describe the man, could help them find him, could watch him face a firing squad for the crime of keeping his word to a dying enemy soldier. "No," she said, her voice steady, despite the lie burning in her throat like acid. "I haven't seen anyone." The sergeant nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face like he didn't quite believe her. "If you do, Mrs. Holbrook, you call us immediately. Don't approach. Don't engage. He's dangerous." "Of course," Margaret said. "Thank you, Sergeant." They left. Margaret closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd just lied to military police, had obstructed an investigation, could be arrested for aiding an enemy combatant. And she didn't care. Because Friedrich had done something more dangerous than escape. He'd chosen mercy over orders, had chosen humanity over allegiance, had kept a promise that honour demanded, but common sense forbid. And Margaret Holbrook, nurse's daughter, widow, proper Englishwoman who'd never broken a rule in her life, had just decided that some promises were worth protecting, even if they came from the enemy. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed reading Thomas's letter by candlelight, tracing the words where the handwriting changed, where Friedrich's hand had taken over. And she noticed something else. A second page, tucked behind the first. Not in English, in German. Margaret didn't speak German, but she knew someone who did. The next morning, November fog still thick as guilt, Margaret walked to the church on High Street, where Father Patrick O'Brien ran a refugee assistance program. He'd been a missionary in Germany before the war, spoke the language fluently, and more importantly, asked fewer questions than most. "Margaret," he greeted her, his Irish accent softening the morning cold. "What brings you out in this weather?" She handed him the second page. "Can you translate this, please?" Father O'Brien took the paper, read it, and his face went still. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" He looked at her for a long moment, then began to read aloud, translating as he went. "To whoever finds this with Captain Holbrook's letter. My name is Friedrich Weber. I am a medic with the 21st Panzer Division. I am not a good soldier. I have spent this war trying to save men I am supposed to help kill. When I found Captain Holbrook, he was dying from wounds I could not fix. He asked me to deliver his letter to his wife. I said yes because refusing a dying man is something I cannot do. But I need you to know something. Your husband did not die alone. He did not die afraid. He died talking about you, about mornings and laughter and love. He died human. I helped him write when his hands wouldn't work anymore. I promised him I would find you, and I will, even if it costs me everything. Because if I can keep one promise in this war, if I can do one thing that matters more than which uniform I wear, then maybe I am still more than what this war has made me. Forgive me for the intrusion. Forgive me for being German. But know that your husband was loved even by his enemy in the moments when it mattered most. Friedrich Weber." Margaret's vision blurred. Father O'Brien handed her a handkerchief. "This man," the priest said quietly, "he's in terrible danger." "I know. And you want to help him?" It wasn't a question. Margaret looked at the priest, at this man who'd spent his life believing in mercy, in sanctuary, in the idea that some things transcended politics and nations and wars. "Yes," she said, "I want to help him." Father O'Brien was silent for a long time. Then he nodded once. "The church has connections, networks that help refugees, displaced persons, soldiers who've lost their way. We ask questions later than the military does. If this Friedrich finds his way to us, we might be able to help. Might be able to keep him alive until the war ends, and these things can be sorted out properly. Thank you, Father." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This is dangerous, Margaret. For him. For you. For everyone involved." "I know," Margaret said. "But some promises are worth the danger." She didn't see Friedrich again for 3 weeks. The military police searched, asked questions, knocked on doors, found nothing. And Margaret went to work at the hospital where she volunteered, helped with wounded soldiers who came back from France with injuries and trauma and nightmares. And every day she wondered if Friedrich had made it, if he was safe, if keeping his promise had cost him his life. Then, on December the 1st, Father O'Brien sent word. "Come to the church. Back entrance." Midnight. Margaret arrived in darkness, the fog still thick, still clinging to Dover, like it had decided to stay forever. The priest met her at the door. "He's here," Father O'Brien said quietly, "in the basement, half-starved, frostbite on both feet, but alive." Margaret followed him down stone steps that smelled of damp and old incense, and there, in a corner of the church basement wrapped in blankets and shaking from cold that went deeper than weather, was Friedrich Weber. He looked up when she entered, and recognition hit his exhausted face like a blow. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said, his accent thick, but his pronunciation careful, like he'd been practicing. "You got letter?" "Yes," Margaret said, kneeling beside him. "I got the letter. I am sorry. For your husband. For everything." Margaret reached out, and before she could think about whether it was appropriate, whether it was allowed, whether it violated every social norm she'd been raised to respect, she took his hand, the hand that had held the pen, the hand that had helped Thomas write his goodbye. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Friedrich's eyes filled. "In war," he said slowly, choosing each English word like stepping on uncertain ground, "we lose what make us human. Your husband, he remind me, there is still human, still love, still promise that matter more than orders." "Why did you do it?" Margaret asked. "Why risk everything?" Friedrich was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled something from inside his shirt. A photograph. Worn. Creased. A woman with dark hair, and a smile that looked like it had been earned, not given freely. "My wife," he said. "Anna. She is in Berlin. I have not seen her in 2 years. Every day I think, if I die, who will tell her I love her? Who will bring her my last words?" He looked at Margaret with eyes that had seen too much. "Your husband?" He give me answer. "I will. I will be man who bring last words, because maybe, somewhere, someone do same for me. For Anna." And Margaret understood. This wasn't about nations or armies or politics. This was about 2 men who loved their wives more than they loved victory. 2 men who'd found each other in the worst moment possible and had chosen to be human instead of enemies. One who'd asked for help, one who'd said yes, and both willing to risk everything for a promise that had nothing to do with the war and everything to do with what remained when the war was over. Father O'Brien's network kept Friedrich hidden for 6 weeks, in the basement of churches, in the attics of sympathetic families, in the spaces between official attention and official knowledge where refugees and deserters and lost souls found temporary safety. Margaret brought him food, some bandages for his frostbite, and news from the war, the Allies pushing into Germany, Hitler's last offensive failing in the Ardennes. The sense that the end was coming, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. They talked, in broken English and simpler German. Margaret was learning from a dictionary, about their spouses, about life before the war, about what came after, if there was an after. Friedrich told her about Anna, about their apartment in Berlin with its view of the Spree, about their plan to have children after the war, about the last letter he'd received from her 6 months ago that said the bombing was getting worse, but she was alive, she was waiting, she believed they'd see each other again. Margaret told him about Thomas, about their courtship, about the wedding in a village church that felt like a lifetime ago. About the plans they'd made for a house by the sea, for children who'd grow up without war, for a future that had died in French mud with a mine that wasn't supposed to be there. And in those weeks, something strange happened. Margaret started to heal. Not because the grief was less, but because sharing Thomas's memory with the man who'd honoured it felt like keeping Thomas alive. Like proving that Thomas's last act of love hadn't ended with the delivery of a letter, but continued in every conversation, every shared memory, every moment when Friedrich said, "He loved you very much. I could see this. Even dying, he loved you." It was the strangest grief ritual imaginable. A war widow and an enemy soldier, sitting in church basements, keeping each other's spouses alive through words. On January 15th, 1945, Father O'Brien came to Margaret's house with news. "The Red Cross has agreed to take Friedrich. They're transporting POWs to processing centres. If we can get him there without the military police finding him first, he can surrender officially. No desertion charges, just a regular POW who got separated from his unit." "Is it safe?" Margaret asked. "Safer than staying hidden," the priest said. "The war's ending. In a few months, POWs will be repatriated. He might actually make it home to Anna." Margaret nodded, felt something loosen in her chest, a purpose she hadn't known she needed. "When?" "Tomorrow night." They moved Friedrich at midnight, through fog that had become familiar, almost comforting. Margaret drove, because Father O'Brien didn't have a car, and Friedrich couldn't be seen in public. The Red Cross Centre was 30 miles inland, past checkpoints that made Margaret's heart hammer against her ribs, even though her papers were legitimate and the cargo hidden under blankets in the back looked like nothing more than medical supplies. They were stopped twice, searched once, and both times Margaret channeled every ounce of proper British composure she possessed, answered questions with calm authority, and watched soldiers wave her through without looking too carefully at the cargo. When they reached the Red Cross Centre, Friedrich climbed out slowly, his frostbitten feet still not fully healed. He looked at Margaret for a long moment. "I cannot thank you," he said. "There is no words big enough." "You kept your promise to Thomas," Margaret said. "That's thanks enough." "When war is over," Friedrich said carefully, "if I live, if Anna lives, I will write you. I will tell you we are okay, because you deserve to know. You deserve to know this story have happy ending for someone." Margaret's eyes burned. "I'd like that." Friedrich nodded once, then walked toward the Red Cross building, toward surrender, toward the slim chance of survival and the hope of seeing his wife again. Margaret drove home through the pre-dawn darkness alone. The letter from Thomas sat in her pocket. The memory of Friedrich's gratitude sat in her chest like a warm coal. And for the first time since July 14th, since the telegram, since the words "regrets to inform," Margaret felt something other than grief. Not happiness, not yet, but purpose, meaning. The knowledge that Thomas's last act had created ripples that went further than either of them could have imagined. That a promise kept by an enemy had saved that enemy's life. That love could cross borders that armies couldn't. That even in the middle of hell, humans could choose to be human. Friedrich Weber survived the war, surrendered to the Red Cross in January 1945, was processed as a regular POW, repatriated to Germany in September 1946, found Anna alive in the ruins of Berlin. They had 3 children and ran a bookshop in Munich for 40 years. And every year, on July 12th, the anniversary of Thomas Holbrook's death, Friedrich sent Margaret a letter. Just a few lines, always in careful English, always saying the same thing. "Anna and I are well. We remember your husband. We remember his love for you. We remember that promises matter. Thank you for your mercy. F.W." Margaret kept every letter. 43 of them by the time Friedrich died in 1989. She never remarried, never left Dover, never stopped missing Thomas. But she also never forgot that in the worst moment of her life, An enemy had chosen to be human, had crossed lines that shouldn't be crossable, had kept a promise that honor demanded and common sense forbid, and she'd chosen to save him for it. This is the story they don't teach you, the one that doesn't fit neatly into allies and enemies, the one that reminds us that even in the darkest moments of human history, love was stronger than war, promises were stronger than politics, and mercy was the most dangerous, most powerful, most human choice anyone could make. If this story reminded you that history is more complex, more beautiful, and more heartbreaking than we usually admit, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tell me if your family has stories like this. Tell me what we've forgotten that deserves to be remembered. Because at POW Two Declassified, we don't just tell war stories, we tell human stories that happen to take place during war. And those are the ones that matter most. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and I'll see you in the next story.